Hi, I want to tell you something that took me longer than it should have. Some of the habits that made me successful made me difficult to live with after I retired. That's not a sentence I enjoy saying. When I was building the business, I had a way of moving through the world. Fast, decisive, controlled. I measured the day by what got done. I measured people by whether they kept their word. I measured myself by whether I was useful. That worked. Not always beautifully, not always kindly, but it worked. Then retirement came, and the strange thing happened. The same habits that helped me survive being broke at 31, raise a family, build something real, pay off a mortgage, protect our savings, deal with Medicare paperwork, and stop worrying about the grocery bill. Those habits started hurting me, not financially, personally. Barbara saw it before I did. She usually does. I thought I was adjusting. I thought I was being disciplined. I thought I was just a man who had standards. Barbara called it something else. She said, "Alan, you retired from the business. You didn't retire from being hard to be around." I laughed when she said it. Then I got quiet, because the problem with a true sentence is that it keeps working on you after the room goes quiet. I had spent 40 years becoming the kind of man who could handle pressure. Then the pressure changed, and I didn't know who I was without it. That's where this starts. Not with money, with habits I had praised in myself for decades and then had to break. The fear was simple, but I didn't know how to name it. I was afraid that if I stopped performing like a successful man, I would stop being one. That's a ridiculous sentence in one way. I know that. I wasn't going back to sleeping on a friend's sofa. I wasn't trying to figure out rent with a negative bank balance. Barbara and I were fine. The adult children were grown. Daniel was on the West Coast. Rachel was nearby. The house was taken care of. The numbers were not the emergency. But my body didn't believe that. You wake up and nobody is waiting for your decision. Nobody needs the call returned in 6 minutes. Nobody cares what time you get dressed. And that feels strange. Not good weird, just weird. A man can confuse peace with irrelevance. I did. So I kept bringing old habits into a new life. I tried to manage my mornings like a company. I treated normal conversations like negotiations. I answered emotional questions with operational answers. I kept score when nobody was playing. I'm not going to give you a 5-step system. I don't have one. I'm just going to tell you what happened, what Barbara noticed, what I resisted, and what I had to loosen my grip on. Because retirement didn't make me softer at first. It exposed how hard I had become. We're in the car outside Rachel's house. This was maybe a year after I had stepped back fully. Sunday afternoon, warm Florida weather. Eli had been showing me a Lego thing for 20 minutes, and I understood maybe 8% of it. Maya had argued with Mark about whether a cookie could count as lunch. Normal family chaos. Beautiful, honestly. We got in the car, and before I could start it, Barbara said, "Do you know what you did in there?" I said, "What did I do?" Already defensive. That's a useful detail. She said, "You turned every conversation into a lesson." I said, "No, I didn't," which meant yes, I probably did. She looked out the windshield and said, "Rachel said she was tired and you told her how to organize her week. Daniel called and you told him how to handle a work problem. Eli showed you his Lego set and you asked if he had a plan for finishing it." I remember that one. Poor kid was 10 years old, building a spaceship, and I was asking about project management. There are moments in a marriage when your wife doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't have to. Barbara just sat there. I looked at the steering wheel, black leather, little silver logo in the middle. My hands looked older than I expected, and I realized something I didn't like. I had spent so long being useful that I didn't know how to just be present. That's different. Being useful is not the same as being loved. Being needed is not the same as being welcome. I didn't have those distinctions clear, not then, maybe not for most of my life. So I want to talk through the habits I had to break. Not because success is bad, it isn't. Discipline matters, work matters, responsibility matters, keeping your word matters. My father would have had no patience for a man who mocked those things. But retirement changes the room. A habit that served you in the marketplace can cost you something at the dinner table. And I didn't understand that until I was already paying for it. The first habit I had to break was treating every hour like it had to produce something. That one sounds noble. It's not always noble. For most of my adult life, I woke up with a list in my head before my feet hit the floor. Calls, meetings, problems, people waiting, checks to sign, deals to move, fires to put out. I had built that machinery inside myself. Then retirement arrived, and the machinery kept running. Only now it had nowhere useful to go. I remember one Monday morning clearly. Barbara was reading at the kitchen table. I was standing by the counter with coffee, looking at my calendar. There was almost nothing on it. A dentist appointment on Wednesday. Dinner with Rachel on Friday. That was it. A sane man might have felt lucky. I felt embarrassed. So I started filling the day with nonsense. I reorganized a drawer that was already organized. I sent 3 emails that did not need to be sent. I called someone from the business to check in, which is a polite way of saying I wanted to feel necessary. They were fine. That was almost insulting. Then I wrote down 6 things I was going to accomplish that day. Not because they mattered, because I needed evidence that I had not disappeared.
Barbara watched this for a while. Then she said, "Are you allowed to have a morning?" I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "Exactly." I didn't like it, but she was pointing at the disease. I had confused motion with worth. When you're building something, output matters. It really does. Sentiment doesn't pay invoices. Good intentions don't make payroll. I know that. But after retirement, not every hour has to justify itself. That's the part that felt almost immoral to me.
Sitting with coffee for 30 minutes felt like theft. From whom, I have no idea. That's how deep the old habit was.
I don't fully understand why men like me turn rest into guilt, but I know we do. Maybe because rest feels too close to weakness. Maybe because quiet gives the truth room to talk. Either way, I had to stop making my calendar prove I still mattered. Some days now, I let a morning stay open. Not perfectly, I still twitch a little, but I can do it. The second habit I had to break was answering feelings with strategy. This one cost me more than I knew. In business, when someone brought me a problem, I looked for the fix. Fast, clean, practical. Who calls whom? What's the number? What's the risk? What's the next move? That skill made me money. It also made me a very annoying husband. Barbara would say that more elegantly. Actually, no, she probably wouldn't. She'd say, "You were exhausting." A few months into retirement, Barbara told me she felt lonely in the house. I heard the word lonely, and my brain opened a filing cabinet. Solutions, dinner reservations, more visits with Rachel, a trip up north, a new club, a charity board. Maybe she should call her friend Marlene. Maybe we should host Shabbat dinner twice a month. I said all of that, quickly, efficiently, like a fool with a nice watch. Barbara listened. Then she said, "I wasn't asking you to solve loneliness."
I was telling you I felt it. That sentence annoyed me because I didn't know what to do with it. If a problem can't be solved immediately, I used to treat it like bad information. But not every hard thing is asking for a plan. Sometimes a person is handing you a feeling because they trust you with it. And if you throw a strategy at it too fast, it lands like rejection. I didn't know that. Or maybe I knew it and ignored it because action was easier. I did the same thing with Rachel. She called one afternoon after a difficult week with the kids. Maya had been sick, Mark was traveling, Eli had a school issue. Rachel sounded tired in that way adult children sound when they don't want to worry you. I started advising. 10 seconds in, she went quiet. Then she said, "Dad, I just wanted to talk." There it was again, the old habit. Fix, improve, direct, correct, optimize. Those words built my life. They did not build intimacy. I had to learn to say, "That sounds hard." You would think a man with my age and my forehead would know how to say 4 simple words. Apparently not. The third habit I had to break was needing to be the smartest man in the room. That one is ugly. Let's call it what it is. I came up broke. Real broke. At 31, I had more confidence than money, which is a dangerous combination. I made bad decisions with conviction. Then I got humbled. After that, I learned to be sharp. I learned to read the room. I learned to hear what wasn't being said. I learned to know the number before anyone else admitted the number mattered. That saved me. But later it became a costume I didn't know how to take off. At dinner, at meetings, with the kids, even with friends, I had this habit of adding the final word. Not always loudly, not in a cartoon way, but I wanted the room to know I had seen the angle. Barbara called it polishing the coin. She said, "Someone puts a coin on the table, and you have to pick it up and shine it." She was right. I did it with Daniel once. He was telling me about a decision at work, something with software. He explained it. I nodded like I understood, which I did not really. Then I gave him a principle, a big fatherly principle, the kind that sounds good and may have no application whatsoever. Daniel smiled, patiently. That's when I knew I had become the older man who talks over the actual subject. I hated that, because I used to be the younger man listening to older men who did exactly that. Life has a sense of humor, not a kind one. I started practicing a sentence that felt almost physically uncomfortable. I don't know enough about that. There, that was it. No speech, no principle, no story from 1998, just an admission. And something strange happened. People kept talking. More, actually. Daniel explained things better when I stopped pretending to understand them. Rachel told me more when I didn't turn every moment into wisdom. Barbara relaxed when I didn't compete with silence. I had spent years thinking authority came from knowing. In retirement, I started seeing another kind. Authority can come from not needing to prove you know. That took me a long time, longer than it should have. The fourth habit I had to break was confusing control with care. This one is subtle. It hides inside love. When you have built a life from nothing, control feels responsible. You check the details. You ask the extra question. You plan for the bad outcome. You keep the umbrella in the car before the rain starts. There's nothing wrong with that, until the people around you feel managed instead of loved. Barbara and I were planning a trip up north. Nothing dramatic. A few days. See some people. Breathe different air. I had the flights, the car, the restaurant, the arrival time, the backup reservation, the second backup reservation, and a folder on my phone with confirmation numbers. Barbara looked at me and said, "Are we going somewhere or acquiring a company?" I laughed, but I didn't change anything. Then the first flight was delayed, not canceled, delayed, a normal thing. I became irritated immediately, not because the delay mattered, because the plan had been disrespected. That's a very successful man kind of insanity. The plan had been disrespected. Barbara sat next to me at the gate reading a magazine like a person with a functioning nervous system. I was checking updates every 3 minutes. Finally, she said, "Alan, we're retired. Where exactly are we late to?" I had no answer. That's the problem with retirement. It removes many of the excuses you used for being tense. If I was angry during my working years, I could blame urgency, clients, deadlines, the market, travel, pressure. Retirement takes away some of those covers. Then you're left with yourself. And sometimes yourself is still pacing at the gate for no good reason. I had to learn that care doesn't always mean control. Sometimes care means letting the day be a little loose. Sometimes it means asking Barbara what she wants before I've already booked the restaurant. Sometimes it means not turning a family visit into a military operation with dessert. I'm still not great at this. Barbara would confirm that with unnecessary speed, but I'm better. The fifth habit I had to break was using money to avoid vulnerability. This is the one I resisted the most. because money does solve certain problems. Let's not pretend it doesn't. I've been broke, real broke. Anyone who tells you money doesn't matter has either never lacked it or has forgotten the lesson. Money pays doctors. Money fixes roofs. Money gets the car repaired without a family meeting. Money lets you help a child without turning your own lights off. So yes, money matters. But there are things it cannot buy. Trust me, I tried. When I didn't know how to apologize, I bought something. When I had been gone too much, I booked a better trip. When I felt distance with the kids, I offered help with something practical. When I didn't know what to say to Barbara, I suggested dinner somewhere expensive enough to cover the silence. Sometimes that helped. Usually it didn't. A bill can be paid without a wound being touched. Years ago, when Rachel was younger, I missed something important at her school. I don't even remember the event clearly now. That's how bad it is. A recital, maybe. A presentation. Something where a father should have been in the room. I was away. A deal was moving. That was always the sentence. Later, I bought her something. I think it was a bracelet. Not cheap. Pretty. She thanked me. But the look on her face told me the truth. I had answered absence with an object. That's not the same currency. In retirement, this habit had nowhere to hide. There were fewer business excuses, more time, more quiet meals, more chances for someone to say, "That hurt me," and wait for a real answer. I didn't like real answers at first. Real answers expose you. Money protects you from certain embarrassments. It does not protect you from being known. And being known is harder than being admired. I had to learn to say, I was wrong. Not with a gift, not with a reservation, not with a speech about how hard I was working back then. Just the sentence, I was wrong. It still doesn't come naturally, but it comes. The sixth habit I had to break was believing my old reputation still had work to do. This one surprised me. When you've built something, people know you a certain way. Reliable, decisive, busy, hard to reach, important. A little intimidating, maybe. I don't say that proudly. I say it because it was true in certain rooms. Then retirement changes the rooms. Nobody at the pharmacy cares who you were. The young man helping you reset your phone does not care that you once handled a 7-figure problem before breakfast. Your granddaughter does not care that people used to wait outside your office. Maya cares whether you'll sit on the floor and play a card game with rules she changes halfway through. That's humbling. One afternoon, I was trying to explain something to her. She was 7. I was using too many words because that's one of my gifts. She looked at me and said, "Grandpa Allen, you're making it boring." Clean hit, no appeal. I stopped talking. We played her version of the game. I lost, partly because the rules were fraudulent, but I stayed. That did more for our relationship than any story about the business ever could. I think a lot of men retire with a resume still hanging around their neck. We don't know we're wearing it. We bring old titles into new rooms. Founder, owner, executive, provider, closer, builder, the man people called. But grandchildren don't need a resume. Adult children don't either, not really. Spouses definitely don't. They already lived the resume. Barbara didn't marry my accomplishments. She survived many of them. That line sounds funny. It's also true. I had to stop trying to be impressive in rooms where I was already loved. That's harder than it sounds, because being impressive is safer. Love asks for more. The seventh habit I had to break was thinking slowing down meant losing. My father used to say a man should keep his word even when nobody is watching. He believed that deeply. I still do. But somewhere along the way I added other things to the rule. Move fast, answer first, win the exchange, stay ahead, never appear uncertain, keep the upper hand. My father didn't teach me all that. The world did, and I cooperated. For decades, speed looked like strength. If I answered quickly, I seemed sharp. If I moved quickly, I stayed ahead. If I decided quickly, people trusted the decision. Sometimes that was good. Sometimes I was just impatient with better lighting. Retirement forced me into a slower room. There is no prize for finishing breakfast first. There is no award for checking the weather 6 times. There is no bonus for turning a walk with Barbara into a route optimization problem. I wish that last one were hypothetical. We were walking near the water one evening. Beautiful light, quiet air, the kind of moment people claim they want more of. And I was calculating how far we'd gone. Barbara stopped and said, "Can we just walk badly?" I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "Without measuring it." I remember that. Walk badly. What a perfect phrase. It meant be here, not improving it, not tracking it, not turning it into proof. Just walking. That was hard for me. Not because walking is hard, because purposelessness felt like failure. But it isn't. Sometimes the purpose is the person beside you. Sometimes the point of the conversation is not the conclusion. Sometimes the day doesn't need to become a result. I'm still learning that. Slowly, of course, which is probably the only honest way to learn slowing down. I don't want to make this sound cleaner than it is. I did not retire and become wise in a straight line. I became restless, then controlling, then defensive, then, occasionally, teachable. Barbara deserves credit for not letting me hide behind the successful version of myself. She didn't attack it. She just kept asking whether that version was still serving our life. Some days it was, some days it wasn't. And knowing the difference has become part of retirement for me. There are habits I still respect. I still believe in discipline. I still believe a man should do what he says. I still believe excuses are expensive. But I don't want to spend the last part of my life being efficient and unavailable. I don't want Barbara to feel managed. I don't want my children to feel coached every time they call. I don't want my grandchildren to inherit a grandfather who knew how to win rooms and didn't know how to sit in one. That's the work now. Not dramatic, just daily. If any of this landed for you, leave a comment. I'm curious about one thing. What habit followed you into retirement that didn't belong there anymore? Maybe it was working too much. Maybe it was controlling the schedule. Maybe it was measuring your worth by money, productivity, or being needed. Maybe it was something nobody else could see, but you felt it every morning. Tell me that one, not the polished version, the real one. I read those comments. Barbara reads some of them too, though she pretends she doesn't. And sometimes one sentence from a stranger makes me look at my own life a little differently. That's useful at this age. More useful than pretending I've already figured everything out. All right, I'll see you next time.